Hey, I'm here with James Priest, the co-founder and developer of Sociocracy 3.0, who is speaking at this year's Brewing Agile. Um, at Brewing Agile, rather than deciding on a theme or requesting our speakers speak on a certain subject, what we like to ask them to do is just choose a subject that they're passionate about, which I remember I watched your talk the other day, James, and I remember you speaking about how much you enjoyed that approach to doing it. So this year you have the title of the talk is Reclaiming the Power of Argumentation to Connect and Enlighten a Divided World. Can you tell us about why you're passionate about that?
Sure, Jeff. Well, it's a dangerous thing to ask me to talk about what I'm passionate about, maybe. And this is really a question that the last year's been trying to figure out for myself. I'm looking at the world right now, and I think there's some quite unreasonable things that are unfolding in the world today that are of great concern to me. The topic of division, polarization seems to be rife across political divides, gender divides. I mean, you name it. People are polarizing in all kinds of ways. And as human beings, we've been given this extraordinary gift of cognition and the capacity to reason. And one of my areas of deep interest is around how bringing argumentation and the notion of reasonableness into dialogue can lead to more nuanced perspectives that get beyond this kind of binary either or point of view towards a perspective that's more both and integrating different aspects of and perspectives to better navigate the complexity of the world.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think that that really resonates with me as it's been an important thing that I've learned in my career is the both and, as you said, a perspective of forgetting about the fact that you think you're right and realizing you only have one perspective is a really powerful thing.
Yeah,
And then,
well, oh, and maybe
I,
maybe just one thing to say on that though, because I think this is important. Sometimes it's both and more. Sometimes it is either or. And I
mm,
think this is important to keep in mind as well, because if we lose connection with the idea of certain things being more true than others and more demonstrable than others, then we run into a very dangerous territory indeed. And I see some sort of dissolution in the value of science, in the value of evidence-based decision making and thinking, both in the world at large, but also in organizations as well. And we face a kind of dangerous proposition if we discard reason, if we discard empiricism, and at least weighing up different evidentially based elements for making better sense of the complexities that we face in the world. So I think that's also another perspective that's important. And let me add one more thing, Jeff, because we can shorten this down to your 2 or 3 minute
mm.
clip that you would enjoy. So, another way into this and how I got to this topic is in Sociocracy 3.0, we took Gerard Endenburg's consent decision making and this notion of raising, seeking out, and resolving objections to proposals, existing decisions, and activities based on the decisions that people make. And the reason I'm so passionate about consent decision making, why I think it's so powerful to think about, is not because it's about seeking consent in the way people might imagine that term is more colloquially used, but in the sense that what's interesting about consent decision making is it shifts supremacy from an individual or a group, like in majority decision making, the majority in an autocracy, the individual or the small group, and in consensus, whoever blocks basically, to an abstraction called argument. And if you have a way to establish which arguments are worthy of consideration as a kind of obstruction to proceeding in a certain way, then it enables people in whichever collaborative context they're in, and from my point of view, especially organizations, to be able to harness grains of wisdom and insight and perspective from different people throughout the system to weave those together to develop a more nuanced understanding, more sophisticated approaches for dealing with the challenges and opportunities that people face. And so I think, that to ground all of this into my work as a co-developer of S3 and as someone with a deep interest in this consent decision-making approach over the last, 24 years now, I think this is the underlying point, and it's one that I'd like to orbit around during my talk.
Fantastic. And I guess this leads in well to the workshop that you're hosting called Mastering Difficult Conversations. It sounds like you're going to need to have some of those. So can you tell us a little bit about what people are going to get out of that workshop?
Sure. Well, again, we teach what we most need to learn. And this is another topic that for me is one that's been alive throughout my life as long as I can remember, from growing up in an environment. I spoke to this, I think, in 2017, 18 at the Brewing Agile talk where, my protestations to some of the experiences I was having in my life were shut down with words like, don't argue with me and just do what you're told and blah, blah, blah. And so, I think a lot of people grow up in an environment where they're not really encouraged to speak up, where any objection or obstruction to somebody else's authority, perhaps, or preference can be seen as some kind of offense or disrespect or disregard for their authority, or whatever title they claim to hold. And nonetheless, as adults, we face numerous complex relationships where there are going to be moments when we come to disagreement. And so, on the topic of consent, you need consent to play the game of consent. You need people to concede to something greater than themselves. And in the case of consent decision making, that's a reasoned argument. But in the case where you're confronted by an exchange that may not just be factually based, but might be more personal, relating to interpersonal issues as well, polarization with regard to values and different perspectives on the world, that question of how you approach that, depending on the context, is one that we all have to face. And if we're just running on our habitual behaviors, then we're going to get what we always got. And in certain moments, depending on the nature of that potential conflict, that's going to turn out for better or worse. But as you know, I've got a deep fascination in patterns. S3 is a library of human behavior patterns. It's not things we created. It's based on our observations of human wisdom and how our ancestors learned to navigate complexities in the world. And if you look at conversations, if you look at underlying patterns that can guide people toward increasing the potential in a moment of polarization and tension with another, toward being able to gain some kind of mutual appreciation and respect for each other's perspective and the ground on which they stand, then you're going to be better resourced to move forward in a conscious and intentional way and play your part in guiding that conversation toward a positive outcome. And perhaps the other thing to mention is, in the case that that doesn't work, because I'm not naive in the fact that people don't always wish to cooperate. People don't always wish to reciprocate at your goodwill and wish an invitation to proceed in a more mature, balanced, compassionate, and open way. And so then that question also, what do you do in those moments? What do you do when somebody shuts the door? But in the case of an organizational context, you still need to work with that person. You still need to collaborate in different ways. So what are the different ways that you can handle those challenging situations? Depending on the context and depending on the level of openness or otherwise that these people demonstrate in your wish to proceed in some kind of how would I put it? Some kind of mutually respectful way towards some kind of agreement together. I guess something like this. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we really look forward to having you, and we look forward to having lots of people there to see it and learn from it.
Great, Jeff. Yeah, I'm looking
Thanks so
forward to
much for your
it.
time.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure. See you soon.